The shrill scream of a woman echoed through the empty apartment, a raw sound that shattered the fragile silence of the night. She stood in the doorway, clutching her child, a sense of disbelief etched on her face. Her ex-husband's silhouette faded into the hallway, his footsteps heavy, his anger palpable. The door slammed behind him, a final punctuation to the heated confrontation. Sirens could be heard distantly, an ominous reminder of how quickly life can spiral. Her heart pounded as her thoughts raced. What had just happened? The weight of betrayal hung in the air, suffocating her. She looked down at her child, whose innocent eyes did not yet understand the gravity of the situation. The fear in her chest threatened to choke her, but she knew this was just the beginning. The custody battle she had been dreading had begun in the most painful way imaginable. She was no longer just fighting for herself, she was fighting for her child, for their future. The following morning, the weight of the previous night's events seemed to linger in the air, like an unwanted shadow. She sat at the small kitchen table, her fingers brushing over the edge, as if trying to ground herself in the reality of the moment. Her thoughts were a jumble of fear, rage, and disbelief. The battle had only just begun, and already she was overwhelmed. The phone call had come in the early hours, a reminder that her ex-husband's actions would have consequences. The lawyer was already pushing for a court date. Her life was on the verge of being turned upside down once again. The question swirled in her mind. Would she be able to fight this? How could she stand up to someone who had so much power to hurt her? She looked across the room to the child, who was now playing quietly in the living room. Their innocence was a painful reminder of what she stood to lose. It wasn't just her freedom that was at stake, it was her child's future. A sense of duty swept over her, stronger than the fear. She would fight with everything she had. Later that day, she found herself sitting in a sterile office, facing the attorney. The room was cold, and the furniture was unnervingly neutral, as if the space was designed to strip away emotion. The lawyer was speaking, but her mind was miles away, caught up in the overwhelming reality of what was unfolding. The legal jargon didn't help ease her fear, it only made her realize how little control she truly had. The attorney's voice was calm, but her heart beat like a drum in her chest. As he spoke about the legal process, the hearings, the potential outcome, the gravity of the situation became painfully clear. This wasn't just a divorce, this was a battle for her child's future. The question now was whether she had the strength to face the fight head-on. She wasn't sure, but she knew one thing for certain: she couldn't back down. Her child's well-being depended on her. That night, sleep eluded her. The weight of the battle ahead pressed down on her chest like an invisible hand. The room was silent, save for the rhythmic breathing of her child, who had long since fallen into a peaceful slumber. But for her, rest was a luxury she couldn't afford. Her thoughts circled relentlessly. How had it come to this? Every decision she had made to protect her child now seemed to hang in the balance. She had kept so much hidden, buried under layers of time and distance, but now the past was surfacing like an old wound, raw and bleeding. The betrayal from her ex-husband had cracked open doors she had desperately tried to keep shut. She glanced at the child, their tiny body curled up under the covers. This was why she had to fight. Not just for herself, but for the future she wanted to give them. She wouldn't allow the past to define their future. She couldn't, no matter how hard it was going to be. The journey would be long, and the road would be steep, but she was ready for it. For them. The next day, the courtroom loomed ahead like a final battleground. She stood outside, the cold breeze biting her skin as she tried to steady her nerves. The doors to the courthouse were intimidating, almost suffocating. Inside, the battle would begin. Her ex-husband had already arrived, accompanied by his new girlfriend, his smug smile never wavering. She could feel the contempt in his gaze, and it made her stomach twist with anger. He had no idea what it meant to be a mother, to sacrifice everything for a child. He had moved on, but she hadn't, not really. Everything she had done, every choice she had made, had been for her child's future. The anger she felt was a fire she couldn't ignore. As she walked through those doors, she felt like she was walking into the lion's den, But she knew she had no choice but to face it. For her child. For herself. The courtroom was as cold as it was intimidating. She took her seat, her body trembling, but she forced herself to appear calm. The tension in the room was palpable, the air thick with unspoken judgments. Her ex-husband sat across from her, his face a mask of arrogance, his lawyer whispering in his ear. She couldn't believe this was her reality, this sterile, emotionless space where the most intimate parts of her life were laid bare for the world to scrutinize. The lawyer beside her whispered, reminding her to focus, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the first time she held her child, to the promises she made to protect them no matter the cost. The sound of the gavel echoed, signaling the beginning of the proceedings. It felt as though time slowed down as she steeled herself for what was to come. This wasn't just a courtroom. This was a fight for everything she held dear. A single glance at her ex-husband, his eyes full of disdain, confirmed it. This was personal. The questioning began, and it didn't take long for her to realize just how ruthless her ex-husband's lawyer was. The questions were designed to tear her apart, to expose her every flaw, to make her doubt her worth as a mother. It was as if they had been waiting for this moment to strike. She had prepared herself for this, hadn't she? The sleepless nights spent going over every detail, every possible outcome. But nothing could have prepared her for the emotional weight of it. Each word felt like a wound, each accusation a blow to her heart. "Are you truly capable of providing a stable home for your child?" the lawyer asked. Her breath caught in her throat. She wanted to scream, to shout that she had sacrificed everything to build a life for her child. But she held it in, forcing herself to answer with composure. "Yes, I am," she said, her voice trembling only slightly. She wasn't going to let them take her child. Not now, not ever. The next few hours dragged on in a blur of legal jargon and accusations. She felt like a ghost in her own life, standing on the edge of something she could not control. Every word felt like a strike, chipping away at her foundation. As the opposing lawyer asked more and more invasive questions, she could feel herself losing ground. At one point, she glanced at her child's empty seat in the courtroom, and it reminded her why she couldn't back down. Thought of losing them was unbearable. She was fighting not just for custody, but for their future, for their safety, for their happiness. She couldn't let this man win. He had already taken so much from her, her trust, her love, and now, it seemed he was trying to take everything she had worked so hard for. Her resolve hardened. She would not give up. Not this time. Just when she thought she couldn't take any more, the voice of her attorney broke through the chaos, offering a rare moment of reprieve. The tables were about to turn. The defense attorney had dug deep, pulling out every dirty trick in the book, but now it was time for her lawyer to show them that they had underestimated her. The cross-examination was sharp and fast. Her lawyer's questions were precise, calculated, aimed at disarming the accusations and exposing the truth behind her ex-husband's lies. "You've never been a present father, have you?" her lawyer asked, leaning in. The words hit with precision, as if slicing through the carefully constructed narrative her ex-husband had been weaving. The ex-husband shifted uncomfortably, and for the first time that day, his confident demeanor cracked. The shift was subtle, but it was there. She could see it in his eyes. The facade was crumbling. By the end of the day, exhaustion had settled in, but so had a new sense of hope. The judge called for a recess, and the courtroom slowly emptied. She stood up, her legs shaky, her heart pounding, but a sense of victory began to take root in her chest. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt like she was fighting back. She hadn't won yet, not by a long shot, but today was a small victory. The cracks in her ex-husband's armor had been exposed. And now, with the momentum on her side, she could feel the tide beginning to turn. This was only the beginning. There would be more battles, more struggles, but for the first time, she felt like she could win. She could protect her child. She could take control. The following weeks felt like a blur, each day bringing a new challenge, a new tactic, a new worry. The custody battle was becoming a war of attrition, and it was taking a toll on her. She had to keep going though. Her child was counting on her. But exhaustion gnawed at her, both physically and mentally. Her lawyer's phone calls were a constant reminder of the looming danger. The legal fees were piling up, and the uncertainty was growing more unbearable by the day. The weight of the financial burden threatened to crush her. The other night, she had found herself staring at the empty refrigerator, wondering how long she could keep pretending everything was fine. But she wasn't alone in this fight. Her best friend Sarah had been a constant support, always checking in, offering a meal, a smile, or just someone to talk to when the world felt too heavy. But no matter how much Sarah tried to reassure her, the fear still gnawed at her insides. She was terrified of losing her child, of being forced to send them to the same man who had betrayed her. The thought was unbearable. She needed to stay strong. For them. One night, as she sat at the kitchen table, sifting through paperwork, her phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. Hesitant, she answered. The voice on the other end was calm but urgent. It was her ex-husband's lawyer, asking for a meeting. Her heart raced, and her mind spun with possibilities. Was this a trap? Another strategy to wear her down? The lawyer had made it clear from the beginning that they were ruthless, but something about this felt different. She didn't trust them. But she couldn't afford to ignore this either. She needed to know what was at stake. She agreed to meet, though the fear in her stomach only grew. What did he want? And why now? The meeting with the lawyer was set for the next day. The day of the meeting arrived, and she found herself pacing in the living room, anxiously waiting. She wasn't sure what she was expecting, but nothing could have prepared her for what the lawyer had to say. He explained that her ex-husband was offering a settlement. He would drop the custody battle in exchange for a financial agreement. The terms were clear. She would pay a hefty sum in child support and give him joint custody. She felt a wave of nausea wash over her as the words sank in. The offer was both a relief and a gut punch. Her ex-husband had always been calculating, always looking for a way to control her. But this offer, it was a trap. If she accepted, she would lose. He would still have the power, and her child would be caught in the middle. She knew she couldn't accept it. But the temptation to end this fight, to put the constant anxiety and stress behind her, was overwhelming. But no matter how tempting, she couldn't compromise on her child's future. She wasn't going to give up without a fight. The next few days were filled with the agony of decision-making. She couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her child's face, innocent, trusting, unaware of the turmoil around them. Every time the offer from the lawyer replayed in her mind, it felt like a betrayal. She had always promised herself that she would never let anyone dictate her relationship with her child. She had sacrificed too much for them, and she couldn't let her ex-husband win, not after everything he had done. But the idea of prolonging the battle, of dragging her child through the emotional wreckage, was almost as unbearable. Sarah, ever the voice of reason, had been by her side through it all. But even her comforting words didn't seem enough. The emotional toll was wearing her down, and she had no idea how much longer she could keep up this fight. But deep down, she knew that giving in wasn't an option. Not now. Not ever. In the end, the decision was made. She would not settle. She couldn't, not after everything she had fought for. The next morning, she called her lawyer and told them to proceed with the case. There would be no backing down, no compromise. The battle would continue. It wasn't going to be easy. She knew that. But her resolve was stronger now. She had come too far to turn back. She was ready to face whatever came next. She looked down at her child, who was sitting on the floor playing with their toys. The innocence in their face was a painful reminder of what was at stake. But it also gave her the strength to keep going. For them. Oh. The weeks that followed felt like an eternity. Every moment was consumed by preparation, gathering documents, attending meetings, and consulting with her lawyer. The courtroom was looming larger than ever, each step bringing her closer to the final confrontation. But the uncertainty never relented. The financial strain, the emotional toll, and the constant dread of what might happen if she lost, these were the ghosts that haunted her every waking hour. At night, she would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to find a way to hold it all together. She was barely holding on, yet she couldn't stop. She couldn't let her child see her break down. The thought of being weak, of losing control, terrified her. Her ex-husband's presence, the way he seemed so calm, so assured, made her doubt herself even more. He had everything on his side: money, connections, and a lawyer who was playing dirty. But there was one thing he didn't have: her love for her child. She was fighting for their future, and she would not stop. Not now. Not ever. On the morning of the next hearing, everything felt different. There was a cold sense of inevitability hanging in the air, a feeling that something was about to break. The tension in her body was unbearable, her every movement stiff and unnatural. She glanced at her child, who was eating breakfast, completely unaware of what was about to happen. The simplicity of the moment, the joy in her child's eyes, only served to highlight the stakes. This wasn't just about a legal case anymore. This was about everything she had built, everything she had sacrificed, and everything she was willing to lose. She kissed her child's forehead and whispered a promise to herself. No matter the outcome, she would fight until the very end. She wasn't going to let anyone take her child away. Not after everything they had been through. The courtroom was different today. The air felt thicker, the stakes higher. Her ex-husband had pulled out all the stops, bringing in a new witness, an old friend of hers, someone she hadn't seen in years. The witness was prepared to testify against her character, painting a picture of a mother who had once abandoned her child for selfish reasons. The words felt like daggers in her heart. This was a person she had trusted, someone who knew the truth about her past, but now they were being used to tear her down. As the witness spoke, she could feel the eyes of the room on her, the judgment, the doubt. Her hands shook as she gripped the edge of the table. The weight of the accusations was suffocating. How could she explain herself when the world was determined to see her as the villain? But she wasn't the villain. She was a mother who had fought, and would continue to fight, for her child's future. And no matter how much they tried to tear her down, she would stand tall. For them. The hours dragged on as the cross-examination began. Her lawyer, a seasoned professional, didn't hesitate. The questions came fast and sharp, and she could see the witness starting to falter. This was her chance. This was the moment when she could turn the tide. The lawyer's questions were precise, pulling apart the witness testimony piece by piece. "Do you have any evidence of these claims?" the lawyer asked. The witness hesitated, faltering under the pressure. The room was silent, every eye on them. "No," the witness admitted finally. "But I remember her leaving." The lawyer pressed on, dissecting the gaps in the testimony and exposing the truth. Slowly, the lies unraveled. The woman felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could win this. But she wasn't celebrating yet. There was still a long road ahead. By the end of the day, she felt emotionally drained, like she had been through a battle and barely survived. But the hope was still there, flickering like a fragile flame. The judge had called for another recess, but she knew this was far from over. She had seen the cracks in her ex-husband's armor, and she knew it wasn't going to take much more for everything to come crashing down. She walked out of the courtroom with her lawyer beside her, the weight of the day's events pressing down on her shoulders. But as she stepped outside into the cool evening air, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: control. She wasn't helpless anymore. She wasn't a victim. She was a mother, and she was fighting for her child. And that gave her the strength to keep going. The weeks after the hearing felt like a whirlwind, with everything shifting and nothing feeling solid. The settlement offer had been withdrawn, but the battle wasn't over. The emotional toll of the proceedings was beginning to show. She had always been the rock for her child, but now, with the constant stress, the sleepless nights, and the relentless pressure, she could feel herself cracking. At times, it was as though she were moving through life in a haze, going through the motions without really being present. But she couldn't afford to break down. Not now. Not when everything was on the line. Every moment of weakness felt like a risk, like a crack in her armor that her ex-husband would exploit. But even as she struggled, there were small victories that helped to carry her through. She had gained a little ground in court, and the judge seemed to be taking her side more and more. Still, there were setbacks. The legal fees were mounting, the stress was overwhelming, and her past, the one thing she thought was buried, was creeping back into the light. The ghost of betrayal was never far behind. One night, as she lay in bed, the silence was unbearable. Her thoughts were a whirlwind, all the fears, doubts, and regrets mixing together. She couldn't help but wonder how much longer she could keep fighting. It seemed like the whole world was against her, her ex-husband, his lawyer, even the very system she had trusted to protect her child. The idea of losing it all, of losing her child, was suffocating. But then she thought about the small victories. The moments when her child smiled, when they reached for her hand, when they whispered, "I love you." Those moments reminded her why she had to keep going. She couldn't give up. No matter how hard it was, no matter how much it cost, she would keep fighting for them. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for the future they deserved. And that thought gave her the strength to face another day. The next court session came with a new twist. An unexpected witness, one from her past, had come forward. It was a family member, someone she had barely spoken to in years, someone she had distanced herself from long ago. The witness was there to testify on her behalf, to vouch for her character and her ability to be a good mother. Her heart raced as the witness took the stand, the flood of emotions almost overwhelming her. She hadn't expected this person to re-enter her life, and the emotions stirred by their presence were mixed with both relief and fear. The witness spoke passionately about her ability to care for her child, about the sacrifices she had made, and the strength she had shown despite the odds. It was a rare moment of hope in a sea of doubt. But as the opposing lawyer began that cross-examination, she could see the tension build. This witness was about to become a pawn in the game. The fear of what might happen next threatened to overwhelm her, but she couldn't let it show. She couldn't let the past ruin her future. The cross-examination of the family witness was brutal. The opposing lawyer tore into them, trying to discredit their testimony, questioning their motives and their knowledge of the situation. The witness held their ground, but it was clear that the defense was going to use every tactic they could to undermine her case. As she sat there, listening to the words that felt like knives, she couldn't help but feel a sense of helplessness. It was as if the system was playing a game, and she was the pawn. Every piece of her personal life was being scrutinized, twisted, and turned against her. But even as the witness faltered, she didn't lose hope. This wasn't over. The truth was still on her side, and she would fight until the very end. She wasn't giving up. Not now. Not when everything depended on it. By the end of the day, the toll of the proceedings had left her physically and emotionally drained. But there was a spark of hope flickering in the distance. The judge had seemed to take notice of the inconsistencies in the opposing lawyer's argument, and there had been moments where it felt like the truth was finally being acknowledged. The family witness, though battered on the stand, had proven to be a valuable ally. As she walked out of the courtroom, her legs felt like they were made of stone, but there was a sense of resolve within her. The fight wasn't over, but it felt like something had shifted. She wasn't sure if she would win, but she was certain of one thing: she had given everything. And that was enough. For now, it was enough. The days following the court hearing were filled with a sense of anticipation, mixed with an underlying anxiety that never seemed to go away. Her ex-husband was relentless. Every call, every email, every message was a reminder that he wasn't backing down. The legal battle had taken on a life of its own, a beast she could no longer ignore. But amid the chaos she found a moment of peace. Her child, as innocent as ever, came to her with a drawing, a simple picture of the two of them holding hands, a smile on their faces. It was a small thing, but it meant everything. She pressed the drawing to her chest, the weight of it grounding her. For a brief moment, all the noise of the world faded away. The fight for custody, the looming uncertainty, it all felt distant. But that moment didn't last long. The phone rang again, pulling her back into reality. The court date was fast approaching. Everything was about to culminate in one final showdown. She wasn't ready to lose. Not now. Not after everything she had sacrificed. The next court session arrived, and the courtroom felt heavier than ever before. She had been preparing for this moment for weeks, but now that it was here, she felt every ounce of the emotional and physical toll the fight had taken. The opposing lawyer was sharper today, more aggressive. His questions were designed to provoke, to make her doubt her own abilities as a mother. She felt every word like a slap in the face, but she couldn't let him see it. She had to remain composed. The ex-husband sat across from her, his eyes cold and calculating. He had been playing dirty from the start, but now, his desperation was palpable. It was clear this wasn't just about custody anymore. This was personal. She had become a target, a symbol of everything he hated, and that made him dangerous. But she couldn't afford to be afraid. She had to stand her ground. She had to protect her child. As the day dragged on, a breakthrough came unexpectedly. Her lawyer had called in an expert witness, a child psychologist who had worked with her and her child for months. The witness testimony was a turning point. The psychologist spoke about the bond between mother and child, about the deep connection that had been built over years of love and sacrifice. Her heart swelled with pride as the psychologist emphasized her dedication to providing a safe, nurturing home. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of relief. This was her chance to show the court that she was more than just a mother trying to fight off an ex-husband's manipulation. She was a mother who had spent every moment of her life ensuring that her child was loved and protected. The ex-husband's lawyer tried to tear the witness down, but it was too late. The damage had been done. The truth was finally being heard. The cross-examination was inevitable, and as expected, the opposing lawyer was ruthless. He tried to tear down the psychologist's credibility, questioned her motives, and even attempted to accuse her of bias. The woman's stomach twisted as she watched the psychologist defend her work, but despite the lawyer's best efforts, the truth held firm. Her lawyer, calm and composed, stepped in to redirect the questioning, reinforcing the psychologist's credibility and expertise. Every word, every movement in the courtroom felt like it could tip the balance in an instant. It was a war of words, and at times, it seemed like they were all just talking in circles. But when the psychologist's testimony was over, the weight of it hung in the air. The damage had been done to the ex-husband's case. He had underestimated the depth of the bond between mother and child. It was clear now, the truth was on her side. By the end of the day, she felt like she had been through an emotional roller coaster. The tension was unbearable, but the sense of hope that had blossomed during the psychologist's testimony lingered in her heart. The final moments of the hearing were a blur, an exchange of final arguments, the judge's questions, and the closing statements. When it was over, the judge had called for a recess. The woman stepped out of the courtroom, her legs shaking from the weight of everything that had happened. The last few weeks had been a battle for her soul, but she could feel that things were shifting in her favor. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for the first time, she felt like she had a real chance. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was fighting with everything she had. And that was enough. The final day in court had arrived. The tension was palpable, but there was a quiet confidence within her. It wasn't just the legal arguments or the evidence, it was the truth. The judge had already heard it all, seen both sides, and now it was time for the decision. She sat there, hand trembling slightly, as the court watched in silence. The outcome was beyond her control now, but she had done everything she could. She had fought, not just for herself, but for her child. The gavel came down, and the judge spoke. The decision was in her favor. She had won. The weight of the victory hit her slowly. It was relief, yes, but it was also the beginning of a new chapter. She was free to raise her child in peace, free from the constant threat of her ex-husband's control. But freedom came at a cost. There would be emotional scars, remnants of a battle fought too long. As she walked out of the courtroom, her child's hand in hers, she realized that this was only the start of their new life. It wouldn't be perfect, but it would be theirs. That evening, As they sat together in their apartment, the weight of the battle began to lift. Her child rested beside her, both of them finally able to breathe without fear. The journey had been long, and the scars were real, but they had made it through. "We're stronger now," she whispered to herself. And for the first time, in a long while, she believed it. With each passing day, they rebuilt. It was slow, but it was steady. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, she was no longer afraid. She had fought for her child, for their future, and in doing so, had found herself again. Her strength, once buried deep under the weight of fear and loss, was now shining through. She had faced her worst fears, and won. As the days passed, the wounds of the past slowly began to heal. There were still challenges ahead, but they were no longer insurmountable. The battles she had fought, both in the courtroom and within herself, had shaped her into someone stronger, someone who could face the future without fear. And with her child by her side, she knew they could face anything together.